everyone, to another episode of The Wealthologist. I'm your host, Chris Hobart, and today I wanted to delve into the current financial climate, where there's been some new data on unemployment and inflation that are pointing towards a pretty good shift in the stance of the Federal Reserve. So back in October, the odds of a rate hike in December were around 30%. Not great, but still there was a potential. But today, they're a mere 0.2% with this new data that came out. And January, it doesn't seem to be on the radar either because it has very similar odds. Now, there's even speculation, now take this with a grain of salt, but speculation about a potential rate cut in May, estimated at 65% by the market. Now, I gotta tell you, these predictions are often hit or miss, especially when we're talking about as far out as May. But if they are anywhere close to accurate, this might spell some relief for long-term investors who have weathered the storm for the past couple of years. These choppy times, sometimes good, sometimes bad, but a lot of yuck mixed in there. So let me break it down for you, give you some clarity. When the Fed tightens or they pause the increase and begin to reduce, history shows that bonds have consistently delivered positive returns across various periods. Now, we're not just talking about one-time occurrence. We're talking about over 6 months, over 1 year, 3 years, and 5-year spans, all showing positive returns. But how positive? Well, here are the averages for those respective times, and they're pretty impressive. 9%, 13%, 10%, and 10% respectively. And it's not just specific types of bonds. It's actually been a widespread trend across varying maturities. Now, in particular, long-term or long-dated bonds have consistently outperformed shorter ones, which would be expected, but this is from their last rate hike to the first rate cut. Now, what about the stock market? How do stocks perform during this period of time? Well, they've shown a positive return about 74% of the time, often surpassing bond returns, but not as consistent in having positive returns. So after a Fed pause, stocks have soared, averaging around 15% in the 12 months after, which trumps the long-term average of 10% in the markets. Now, what about over 5 years? Well, there's nearly 70% positive rate over 5 years. But remember, this is not a crystal ball. Economic cycles differ, and assuming the future mirrors the past, that just isn't wise. But history tends to echo certain themes. So let's take Buffett's analogy about interest rates being akin to gravity for asset prices. Lower interest rates, which is what we had over the past 10, 15, 20 years, they create a light gravitational pull, propelling markets like we've seen in these recent times. But when interest rates go higher, like we've seen the past 2 or 3 years, gravity strengthens, causing turbulence in asset prices to come down due to that increased risk. And like I said, we've endured this for a while, but if the Fed is indeed stepping back, it could signal relief and a push for future gains. Now, be careful before you start revving up the investing engines too crazy, because there's a couple of crucial points I want you to think through. These periods of time, they often come with additional volatility, and expecting a complete return to the glory days of the last bull market, that is probably overly optimistic unless rates drop to zero again, which, just so you're aware, it's highly improbable without a major unforeseen event to force that to happen. So while past performance isn't a crystal ball, it is a beacon guiding us through market gravity. Thing is, gravity itself doesn't alter much, whether in the natural world or in the financial markets. But gravity is a factor, and we have to look at that when we're looking at today's market. I want to thank you for tuning in today. And remember, while history isn't a fortune teller, it is a teacher. Until next time, stay informed, stay cautious, and keep an eye on those market forces. This is Chris Hobart signing off for The Wealthologist.